modification form, and also there is a button for delete. That's all there is to it. The architecture is a very classic one, and I hope that it will be, some of the thinking here will be useful for you in the sense that it is such a classic architecture, and you're likely to encounter it as well. So it's a classic Java EE three-tier architecture with a browser connecting to a web server, which runs a struts MVC, model view controller application, and the model hands off to the business logic on the application server, which in turn connects to a relational database management system. So when I looked at the application, what I noticed was that there was an awful lot of validation. In fact, it looked as though the developers had put all the validation that they knew how to on every tier. So at first sight, this might look like defense in depth, but I'm not so sure whether it is, and I'll be going into, I'll be examining that question. So let's take it one step at a time, and I'd like to start from the back. I'd like to start at the data tier side. And so what we have is a data tier which receives a prepared statement and interacts with the application server that way. And in the data tier, we have a number of constraints formulated in the database as some fields that are not nullable. We have referential integrity constraints. There are some constraints imposed through the data types in specific columns, which might specify the precision of a number, the length of a text, that sort of thing. And you have unicity constraints. Now on the application server, you have an enterprise Java bean, and that exposes two methods, validate and store. And as a parameter, these two methods take a data transfer object, or DTO, and the DTO really makes the link between the form and the database, in the sense that for each field in the form on the web front end, there is a property in the DTO, and for each field in the database table, there is also a field in the DTO. There is a property in the DTO. And so that DTO gets fed to the EJB. So the interaction between the web tier and the business tier is a two-step one. So in the first step, you validate data that you want to write to the database, and in the second step, you actually perform the update. So which incidentally I've shortened here as store. In fact, there are three methods: create, update, and delete. So why would you organize it that way? Well, the reason is that it's a very convenient way of well, basically the user interaction is organized that way, and so that reflects on the architecture of the application. So the user basically has to do this validation step first, well, the user first fills in all the fields, does this validation step, and then he gets the data back, but all the fields are blanked out, and so the only thing that he can do at that point is to do cancel or submit. Yeah? A naive user, in any case, can only do cancel or submit. An attacker, of course, could then go and use another tool to submit the data anyway. So the question is this foolproof? And most of you will have doubts about that, I think. But I'll come back to that point later. Let's first look at the web server. So that's the struts model, and I really don't want to go into that very deeply. I tend to find the struts data flow often quite difficult to understand. It seems to be somehow counterintuitive, and also what I also dislike about struts is that you have an awful lot of configuration to do in XML files, and I find the distinction between what you do in Java code, the coding, the so-called coding, and the configuration job, I find that distinction often rather arbitrary, which tends to mean that the whole thing is more difficult to understand than it needs to be. Yeah, the trouble with the data tier is, first of all, that it's in struts, but maybe that's my prejudice. But more importantly, the validation code that's in that tier is in fact cut and pasted from the business tier, or vice versa. Okay, so we have code duplication here. So let's look at the browser. Now the browser is the data entry point, and as such, it's validating the fields on entry. It does so in JavaScript, and some of these validation routines are hard-coded in the JSP, and some of them are assembled dynamically. So, for example, if you what's a good example now? So there are some regulations that need to be filled in, that securities have to comply to, and the date of the regulation indicates the version, and these dates can only be a number of options, so that is pulled from these options are pulled from the database and used in the check. So let's have a look. Let's critically look at the validation that's happening in the browser. I think that what's good about it is that it enhances the user experience.